Hello, this is Ian Harper welcoming you to Business of Weather podcast, produced in association with Asia Climate Forum, Asia's largest event dedicated to extreme weather and climate change, flooding and poor air quality. In each episode, we'll investigate the increasing impact of extreme weather and climate change on business and society, and look at how weather technology and climate information services can help address the growing challenges. We'll also spotlight the new opportunities for entrepreneurs and business startups seeking to develop the business potential of technology innovations to help those affected by extreme weather. The global shipping industry is responsible for the movement of most of the world's goods. In a typical year, 2020 aside, it transports about 10 billion tonnes of cargo, and this is forecast to increase by over 3% per year for the next 5 years. Almost all of this is transported by ships which burn what can best be described as the dregs of the fuel chain. Known as bunker fuel, it is what's left over after gasoline, diesel and other light hydrocarbons are extracted from crude oil during the refining process. CO2 emissions from global shipping account for over 3% of the global total. By 2050, emissions from global shipping could account for a quarter of all fossil fuel CO2 emissions. The International Maritime Organization, or IMO, regulates the operations of the global shipping industry. It has recently introduced controls to reduce these emissions, but they will need to be policed rigorously. However, as climate change accelerates, is there an opportunity to revert to wind-powered shipping? Ship by Sail, a shipping broker set up by Will Aidney and Will Templeman, has set out to do just that. By tapping into a network of traditional sailing ships, it organises the transport of ethically sound goods to the UK from destinations around the world. Business of Weather spoke to Ship by Sail co-founder Will Aidney to find out more. Welcome to Business of Weather, Will.
Hello, Ian.
Right, to get the ball rolling, tell me about Ship by Sail and how and when you came to set the company up.
Well, Ship by Sail is an environmentally responsible shipping broker and importer of ethically sound goods. So what we do is we work with organisations to transport goods on sailing ships, so they come to this country and from this country with no carbon footprint, so in a very sustainable way. We set this company up, my business partner Will Templeman and myself, about 3 years ago, although we've really only been active for 2 years. Will and I actually met on a development course, sort of a nature-based development course down in Devon in the West Country of England, where we sort of bonded over outdoor activities. And Will told me about this fledgling idea he had to transport goods sustainably. And as my background is in transport and logistics, we were able to put his passion and my expertise together to put the company together.
Right, what's the actual nature of the service that Ship by Sail offers? Are you a brokerage or do you run your own ships?
Practically, we do two things. First of all, we work with various customers to ship goods that they want to bring, usually to the UK from elsewhere, although we do export as well, by coordinating, working out what cargoes they want, and then coordinating with a network of ship owners who have sailing ships that they can transport goods on. And as we did this, we realized that we wanted some products ourselves that we could sell, but more importantly, that we could showcase what we were doing. So we went actually out and found our own sustainably grown products, so notably olive oil from Portugal and coffee from Colombia, that we could bring over on those ships ourselves and market under our brand of ship by sail. But that was very much as a sort of a window to what we were doing more widely. And I think it's also fair to say that what we're really trying to do is promote a different way of doing things, a slower way, a simpler way, more in tune with the earth and with the sea. So not necessarily a throwback to old times, and certainly not sentimental, but getting people to think a bit more about what they're buying, where it's come from, and particularly how it's got to us.
Okay, thanks. Now, how much did it cost to set the company up, and how did you go about funding it?
Well, the initial costs were not that great. So we probably cost us about £20,000 to set the company up in the first place. And we are entirely self-funded. So we both have our own businesses. I've worked in the rail industry for many years, and Will is actually a yurt builder. And we used money from our existing businesses to set this one up.
Now, are there any other similar companies around the world, and do you all work together?
Well, absolutely. There are other brokers, there are ship owners, and there are marketeers. And together we've set something up called the Sail Cargo Alliance, because although we're all working in the same space, and in some ways we might be in competition, actually we're such a small part of the cargo world that it's really essential that we do work together to make sure that we're putting the ships onto the routes that match customers' demands, make sure that we're filling our ships, and make sure that we're growing our fledgling sail cargo industry altogether.
Okay, now, looking more broadly, and taking the UK as an example, how much of the food and other goods sold and consumed in total do you estimate are transported by all types of ships? This is in the UK I'm thinking of here, to give people an idea of the significance of sea-based transport.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I mean, the UK is obviously an island. Now, into the EU, which is a slightly different geography, it's over 50% of everything that comes to Europe comes in a ship. When you get to the UK, that's significantly higher. I'll give you an example. We bring in around about 400 million tons of goods by ship every year. By air is only 2.5 million tons, so a fraction. So absolutely almost everything that we're bringing to these islands is coming on a ship. And if we look at what sort of ships it comes in, if we're bringing in goods, like containerized goods, about half of that comes on your big container ships that you see, and about half of that comes on trucks on roll-on, roll-off ferries. So lots and lots of ferries are arriving, bringing small numbers of ships, small numbers of containers, and then a small number of very, very large container ships are arriving. But we rely completely on the shipping industry to supply these islands. I mean, the Channel Tunnel, which is really the only other way of bringing in goods other than by air, is a very small amount of what comes in.
The weather will have a big influence on your shipping schedules, so how do you deal with the uncertainties of sail power, especially if you're carrying any perishable cargoes?
Well, it is a challenge, and we really start from the premise that we don't carry perishable cargoes. So, fresh goods are really not something that we realistically can carry, partly because of the delays or the uncertainty, and partly because we can't have refrigeration, so everything has to be kept at an ambient temperature. But we have a real challenge because customers are used to a just-in-time supply chain these days. We have developed this, what we would consider unrealistic supply chain around the world, and we are trying to convert customers to a a more sustainable approach, one that's much more in tune with the weather, one that's much more in tune with the tides, for example. So we have to build in buffers. We have to build buffers into our transport schedules, but we also have to build buffers into our supply. So we have to warehouse. And because we're trying to convert an existing supply chain to something that's more environmental, we're having to bear the brunt of that. What we hope in the future is that consumers and our kind of indirect customers, our restaurants and supermarkets, would understand this. But right at the moment, it's largely around us having to take responsibility, and that imports a lot of cost for us, because we have to hold stock. But if we're going to do that, then it really has to be ambient goods. So talked about olive oil. Coffee is another one. We bring it in as green beans, so it gives us much longer before we have to roast it.
Right, now, where do you actually get the sailing ships you use from, and how many do you have access to at the present time?
Well, currently, we're working with about 5 or 6 different ships, and they are typically privately owned. So some from the UK, 2 from the Netherlands. We work with 1 from Germany and 1 from France. So I guess because we're based in Northern Europe, that's where the ships are coming from. They are typically converted ships. So one of the main ships we use between here and Portugal for our olive oil was actually built in the Isle of Wight in the 1870s as a fishing vessel, but was converted to cargo use. Another was built in the 1940s as a minesweeper and is now converted to cargo use as well. But there is a movement to start building some new ships, and we should see those coming online in the next 5 years.
New ships, can you tell me a little bit about these?
Sure. So there was a recognition that what's happening at the moment is pretty suboptimal and pretty inefficient, converting ships that weren't designed for cargo. So if you think where the bulkheads are, how you get cargo in and out, that's difficult. We've got fantastic new technologies out there to build ships, new materials. So if we combine some of the traditional sailing methods, which are very sustainable, with some of the modern technologies, you could actually build a ship. So imagine the Cutty Sark, a modern Cutty Sark, with fantastic technology. It could have, for example, solar panels on the sails. There are opportunities for batteries built into the keel. There are all these opportunities to take new technologies and create kind of a modern equivalent sailing ship with all of these efficiencies. And these are the sorts of vessels that they're mainly on the drawing board. There is one new one being built in Italy at the moment, Brigantes. But we should see these coming online over the next 5 years.
Okay, let's just go back to the existing ships. What's the sort of volume of cargo that these ships you use are able to carry?
Well, it's in global terms, it's small. So the main 2 ships that we work with, one comes across the Atlantic. It carries 35 tons. One that plies the Northern European waters, it's more like 25 tons. We do work with a couple of ships that have about 100-ton capacity, but that's all.
So pretty small relative to a big container ship then?
Oh, just a fraction of the size.
Okay, now what do these sailing ships do when they're not carrying cargo? Would they be used for passenger cruises, perhaps?
Well, interestingly, they tend to work all year round as cargo vessels, but they combine it with a passenger offer. Part of the business model for most of these ships is to carry paying trainees. It surprised me when we got involved in this, the number of people who are interested and willing to pay to learn to sail on traditional sailing ships. So a ship may carry 30 tons of cargo, but it will also have 8 or 10 trainees on it who are necessary to sail the ship, because They they take a lot of manpower, but the business case still wouldn't work to have a crew of 15. It might have a crew of 5 and then 8 to 10 trainees who are also paying to be on those boats.
Okay, just going back to the types of products that you transport, what sort of premium do consumers typically have to pay compared to similar products transported by oil-powered ships?
Well, this is a really interesting question, because there are lots of direct costs and there are lots of hidden costs. So the transport by sail, the basic cost of transporting by ship is probably between 3 and 4 times as much as it is by a large conventional, say, diesel powered container ship. But we have other costs that we have to build into that. We've talked about warehousing. We've talked about timings, how long everything takes. But of course, shipping is only a relatively small part of the total cost of any product. So while we're dealing with reasonably premium products like chocolate or cacao, like coffee, like olive oil, like rum and other spirits, it probably overall only adds about 20% to the cost for the final consumer, even though the transport bit is significantly more expensive.
Right. Now, do the suppliers of the products you transport see sail-based shipping as a big plus point in their own sales and marketing?
Without a doubt, yes. What we find is that partners want to work with us because they're trying to put a sustainable message out there. I mean, what we're very much not about, and to be blunt, don't really want to work with organizations who just want to greenwash. What we're looking for is working with people who really care and want to move this movement forward, because it is a very strong message. Organizations are extremely interested in shipping product by sailing ship, and there's no question, you see it with customers when we put this the message out, particularly on social media. The number of likes you get and the amount of positive feedback you get to every interview or to every article or to every social media post, so it shows that there is a huge amount of interest in this. But the question is how we then couple that with businesses who are actually doing a lot of what they do not in a sustainable way, and that's kind of an ongoing conversation and challenge that we have.
Right. Now, where are the products you ship actually sold? And how can customers be sure that they're being transported by sailing ships? Is there some sort of a kite mark?
Currently, we sell products both retail and wholesale. So our main business is to sell into restaurants. We also, particularly in the West Country of England, have a network of smaller retailers and deli type outlets where you can buy our products, and of course you can also buy them on the Ship by Sail website. We are in discussions with a couple of supermarkets about whether we could do something on a larger scale, and that's very interesting because that's where you run into all the margin questions and all the costings and pricing that we all know the supermarkets are famous for. On the question of the kite mark, I think that's fascinating, because perhaps I should have said this at the beginning, but in a way this is where this really started. If you go into a supermarket, you see that something is fair trade. You can see that a product is organic. You can see that a product is not sourced from a war region. But there's basically no information about how a product gets to you. And this is something that we think over time should absolutely be on that. We are working on a trust basis at the moment. We've had long discussions in the Sail Cargo Alliance about having some sort of kite mark, but we've decided that that's for the future. Right now, that's very expensive and quite bureaucratic, and we'd like consumers to work with us on trust while we build the network. But at the right point, I would have thought that this is absolutely something that we that we need. There, of course, are complications to it about exactly how much is sailed. So typically we work with ships without an engine at all, but there are ships out there that have an engine and might use it occasionally or for port maneuvers. So we'd have to get into the real detail of what justified something, what percentage of a journey made under sail justified it being a sail cargo product, for example.
Right, now, just looking ahead, what are the plans of the future? How do you see this type of service evolving?
Well, I think it's going to evolve in three ways. And I've already touched on it a little bit. I think there is a demand, there is a pent-up demand, and with everything else going on in the world, I can only see this increasing. And I think it will increase in three ways. I think it will increase sort of organically with traditional ships. I think it will definitely increase with some of these new ships with much, much bigger capacities on board. And from the other end, we're starting to see movement around, for example, installing rotary sails on some container ships, that the mainstream industry has acknowledged that they've got problems and they're trying to do something about it. But I think the real drive is going to come from the consumer and from the supply chain. And we're going to have to move them, or they're going to have to move themselves away from this requirement for wanting to buy everything. The Amazon Prime, I'll press a button today and I'll get my product tomorrow, and actually move back to something where people are willing to wait a little bit. And I'll just give you one quick example on that. We've been working very hard with restaurant supply chains, with chefs, to say, you know what, you can actually think forward. You don't have to think about the products you want tomorrow or the day after, but maybe, particularly with your ambient goods, that you can buy these a week in advance, 2 weeks in advance, or even a month. And I think it's that change in mindset which we're trying to drive. And as it changes, it will then, in turn, actually increase the demand for sail cargo goods.
Well, that concludes today's interview. Will Aidney, joint founder of Ship by Sail, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.
You're listening to Business of Weather, produced in association with Asia Climate Forum, Asia's largest event dedicated to addressing extreme weather and climate change, flooding and poor air quality.